to thank the Riverdale Y for graciously hosting us. I'm proud to be joined by Scott Rickman, the Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League, the New York, New Jersey region. New York City Councilmember Eric Dinowitz, who happens to be the chair of the Jewish Caucus citywide. Gideon Taylor, the CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. And we will be joined by Rabbi Bini Kraus, the principal at SAR Academy. Before I speak about the subject matter of today's presser, I want to make a few prefatory remarks. On Friday, January 27th, during International Holocaust Remembrance Day, 7 worshipers at a synagogue in Jerusalem were murdered in cold blood in an act of terrorism. That an act of terrorism would happen at all is shocking. That this act of terrorism would happen in a house of worship, in a sacred space, on a sacred day, Holocaust Remembrance Day, makes it even more shocking and sickening. And so I will ask that we all take a moment of silence to remember the lives lost in the latest wave of terrorism that has swept the state of Israel. I also want to share personal reflections on the murder of Tyree Nichols. You know, Tyree and I are only 4 years apart in age. And as I was watching the video of his brutal beating, I could not help but think that could have been me. That could have been any young black man in America. What was done to Tyree was a vicious and violent gang assault under the pretense of policing. As you know, he was brutally beaten to death. He was pepper sprayed. He had a taser fired at him. He was beaten with a baton. He was punched in his face while his hands were behind his back. He was kicked in his head while lying on the ground. And in the video, he could be seen begging for his life and crying out for his mother. And after he was brutally beaten, he was left to die, to languish, without receiving the immediate medical care that he urgently needed. The depth of dehumanization captured in that video is sickening and shocking. And I ask that we take a moment of silence to remember the life of Tyree Nichols, the value of his life, a life that was shockingly stripped away. We are here to raise awareness about hate in our society and about the most ancient form of hatred, which is anti-Semitism, which dates back not only centuries, but millennia. And there are 2 occasions that bring us here. First, we recently observed International Holocaust Remembrance Day. The Holocaust serves as a reminder of how dangerous and deadly anti-Semitism can be. Right? We know that anti-Semitism can be so deadly that it can lead to the systematic murder of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. Hatred on a scale that none of us can comprehend, but that none of us must ever forget. Right? The Holocaust must always be remembered because it must never be repeated. And it's an indictment of our society that the majority of Americans, according to Pew Research, do not even know the number of people who died in the Holocaust. The second reason we're here is the Anti-Defamation League, an organization that champions human rights and combats extremism. The ADL has come out with a new report about anti-Semitism in America. The ADL will speak about the report in greater detail, but I'll provide a brief overview. Since the 1960s, the ADL has been asking respondents 11 questions that contain anti-Semitic beliefs, anti-Semitic tropes, and conspiracy theories. And the answers to these questions reveal the extent of anti-Semitic belief in American society. Now, we must recognize that hatred ends in violence, but it often begins with belief. And so we have a vested interest in tracking anti-Semitic beliefs in American society in order to anticipate the acts of violence that will follow. When it comes to the breadth of anti-Semitism, the ADL reports that 85% of Americans hold at least one anti-Semitic belief, compared to 61% in 2019. It also found that 20% of Americans hold 6 or more anti-Semitic beliefs, compared to 11% in 2019. And so in the span of a few years, we have seen an outbreak of anti-Semitic sentiment that has led to more violence. We know from FBI statistics that religiously motivated domestic violent extremism, domestic terrorism, and hate crimes are directed against the Jewish community. And we know from NYPD statistics that the main target of hate crimes here in New York City is the Jewish community. I'm proud to report that we in Congress have appropriated more than $300 million for the non-for-profit security grant program, which provides funding to vulnerable institutions like synagogues and Jewish day schools to protect themselves against hate crimes and domestic terrorism. And even though the program is important, it's only part of the solution. It only addresses the violence, which is the symptom. We must address the root causes. We must address and confront the anti-Semitic beliefs that inspire the violence. Combating anti-Semitic beliefs is not only the responsibility of government, it is the responsibility of the whole society. Combating anti-Semitism is not only the burden of the Jewish community, it is an obligation that binds each and every one of us. We each have a duty to stand up and to speak out against anti-Semitism wherever, whenever, and however it appears. We have a duty to stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters here in Riverdale and elsewhere in the United States and elsewhere in the world, including the State of Israel. During January, we observed the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King, who once said that history will record that the greatest tragedy is not the stride and clamor of the bad people, but it's the appalling silence of the good people. And let us not be appallingly silent in an age of anti-Semitism. Let us have the courage to break that silence and to follow the golden rule of treating others as we would wish to be treated with the utmost dignity and humanity. So with that said, I have the honor of introducing Scott Rickman from the Anti-Defamation League. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Congressman Torres, first of all, for hosting this very important press conference on ADL's survey of anti-Semitic attitudes in America. You are a very important partner in the fight against anti-Semitism, and it was a great honor to speak before the Homeland Security Committee of Congress, a meeting that you chaired a few months ago, to talk about the importance of anti-Semitism, extremism, and hate, and combating it. Many thanks for that, and many thanks for all that you do to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. As you stated, my job today is to talk about the survey, Anti-Semitic Attitudes in America. Since 1964, ADL has conducted this survey every few years about Jews in this country. These surveys generally showed a downward trend in anti-Semitic attitudes. That was until this year. That downward trend has now reversed. For me, the most glaring example is the one that you mentioned, the idea that we put out a set of 11 conspiracy theories, 11 statements about Jews that are all, of course, false, and 20% of Americans, we're talking about 66 million Americans, believe in at least 6 of them. That number was 11% in 2019, just a few years ago, so it's almost doubled. One conspiracy theory would be too many, but 6. And as you stated, 85% of Americans believe in at least one conspiracy theory. We should be clear, the questions we asked are some of the most dangerous assertions about Jews and can, of course, lead to violence. We're talking about assertions that Jews control the government, that Jews, and of course we saw in Pittsburgh and Poway how that fueled violence. We've seen how inflammatory rhetoric around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict contributes to a rise in anti-Semitic incidents. I would assume that the man who tossed a Molotov cocktail Saturday night at a synagogue in Bloomfield, New Jersey, did so believing in one of these tropes. These tropes are not just statements, they can lead to violence. We actually polled people on 11 tropes, and 3% of Americans believed in at least one of them. That may seem like a small number, but we're talking about 10 million Americans. We polled people on 11 tropes, and 3% of Americans believed in all 11 tropes. That may seem like a small number, but we're talking about 10 million Americans who believe in all 11 tropes, and there are only 6 million plus Jews in this country. So more than the number of Jews in this country believe in all 11 tropes. There's also a substantial negative sentiment about Israel, which was represented in this survey. 40% of those surveyed believe that Israel treats Palestinians at least somewhat like the Nazis treated the Jews. Here we just had International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and a huge percentage of Americans believe that the Jewish state treats Palestinians the way that the genocidal Nazi regime did. This is beyond absurd. And 17% of those surveyed are uncomfortable spending time with a person who is supportive of Israel. Considering that the latest Pew survey found that 80% of American Jews believe in Israel's right to exist and see it as a core part of their identity, you're saying that over 50 million Americans would not spend time with the majority of Jews. That's not a political statement. That is pure anti-Semitism. When we look at the data, it shows that anti-Jewish conspiracy theory belief and negative sentiments towards Israel, while they are discrete phenomena, they overlap significantly. There's approximately a 14% overlap, meaning if you have an anti-Semitic conspiracy belief, you also have a negative sentiment about Israel. From a demographic perspective, younger Americans have more anti-Israel sentiment and only slightly less conspiratorial Jewish belief. That is a worsening situation, and that the difference between older Americans and younger Americans when it comes to anti-Jewish conspiracy theories is considerably less than in previous studies. For years, younger Americans did not believe in conspiracy theories as much as older Americans did, and we believed, essentially, we were aging out of this problem. That is no longer the case. That trend has reversed with this survey. Very disturbing. Just want to make a few comments on these findings. I can't say that I'm surprised. I'm shocked, but I'm not surprised. Why am I not surprised? Because my office responds to multiple anti-Semitic incidents every single day of the week. I'm the director for ADL's office covering New York and New Jersey, and we respond every single day of the week to anti-Semitic incidents. So I am not surprised. I see this all day, every day. The Molotov cocktail was just one example from Saturday night. The people who respond to these incidents, I should add, are my heroes. They are people who day in and day out work with victims and law enforcement and universities and social media and workplace, wherever these anti-Semitic incidents are taking place. With that said, the data is still stunning and sobering, and we simply have an alarming increase in anti-Semitic attitudes in this country, which I hope will be a wake-up call for this country about what's happening. There are even more dangerous, this is even more dangerous when we think about what's happened over the past few months with celebrities and sports figures who are spouting these conspiracy theories, including Kanye West, who we know blamed Jews for controlling Hollywood, controlling an industry. He has millions of followers, and it validates the belief system of those who are already previously infected with anti-Semitic beliefs. And those remarks can also draw in and convince more people of anti-Semitic and hateful stereotypes. Finally, this comes at a time when anti-Semitic attitudes are at historically high levels. ADL conducts an annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. That audit is not a survey. This is a survey, but that is not. That audit is a compilation of ADL's work. ADL responds to anti-Semitic incidents every day across the country, and once a year we compile that data and we analyze it. We've been doing it since 1979, and our most recent audit was the highest year on record. It was quadruple the number of anti-Semitic incidents that we had seen in 2013. So this comes amidst a terrible rise in anti-Semitism. I need to add that we are not alone here. Jews do not live in a vacuum. There has been a general rise in hate in this country. This isn't just about anti-Semitism. There's a general rise in racism, attacks against the LGBTQ+ community, violence against the Asian community, Islamophobia, etc. This is not just about the Jews, and it is not just a Jewish problem. We all need to fight against this. And of course, Congressman Torres is a real champion in this fight, and we are so grateful to him for this. Thankfully, this survey helps us to be able to describe the nature, the size, the scope of the problem of anti-Semitic attitudes in America. It provides a sense of the features that drive anti-Semitic attitudes, such as ignorance or lack of familiarity with Jews, negative experiences with Jews, or a media diet of anti-Semitism. This wasn't just 11 questions, there were 11 tropes, but there were about 80 questions, and all of this is going to be released in the next few months. You should know that this is only a small part of what we discovered in this survey. It will be released over, I believe, 5 or 6 releases with different pieces of the survey and different cuts of the data. This survey was conducted together with the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, one of the most well-respected survey research institutes, along with the 1-8 Foundation. It was developed over the course of a year-long process, and several researchers have already reviewed the study's findings, expert researchers. It was completed by over 4,000 respondents across the country, representing every type of demographic, old and young, left and right, all different faith and ethnic groups. Finally, as I said, these are only the top-line findings, and not only will the rest of it be released, but all of the raw data will be released, and the ADL historical index data will be released through a data consortium at the University of Michigan. I'll be happy to take your questions afterwards. Thank you.
Our next speaker is the chair of the Jewish Caucus and the leading advocate against anti-Semitism in New York City politics, Eric Dinowitz.
Thank you, Congressmember. I'm Eric Dinowitz, council member here in the 11th District in the North Bronx. And first, I want to thank Congressmember Torres for having this press conference to the ADL, to JCRC, for elevating the issue of anti-Semitism. I think many people who know me know that I was a teacher in the Bronx high schools before I was in the city council. And I remember every single year for many of my students, I was the first Jewish person that they met or that they had a conversation with about what Judaism is. And that's what I think about when I think about anti-Semitism. Because I think most of us think about the end point. We see it in the statistics of hate crimes here in New York City. We see it in the violence. But I think about my students who had never met a Jewish person before. And then I think about music artists, sports stars, and the hate that they spew. And with a lack of positive interactions between Jewish and non-Jewish children, people are going to believe what their idols tell them to believe. And they believe in hate and tropes as indicated by this very troubling survey. My kids went to school here at the Riverdale Y. And I bring that up because I'm looking outside. Y'all probably can't turn your cameras there because they didn't sign the releases. But I see children, the director of the school saying not to do it. But I look outside and I see kids of different backgrounds, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds playing together. And that is a model for what we need to solve this crisis. And we in the council are not just sitting by and waiting for more bad things to happen. We are working with our partners in the federal government to elevate this issue, but we are also taking meaningful steps to address anti-Semitism here in New York City. And so referencing the Riverdale Y and our children, the council has secured money for this institution to do that work of bridging communities and building understanding and education within the Bronx. I've worked with partners in JCRC to lead a delegation of council members to Israel. As referenced in the report, there is a strong correlation between anti-Israel sentiment and anti-Semitic sentiment. And that is solved with education. And that's the work that we've done together. And I want to thank JCRC again for that continued work to break down those barriers and those tropes. Last year, as chair of the Higher Education Committee, I held a hearing holding CUNY to task for the growing anti-Semitism that is being seen on their campuses. The things that we in the Jewish community have been feeling and seeing for so long are reflected in the data that we see in this report. And as a result of that hearing, we have gotten CUNY to meaningfully invest in education, in money, in training, again, to specifically address this deeply troubling rise in anti-Semitism. Scott Richmond said one thing which got me thinking about aging out, about this idea that we can age out of this problem, age out of the problem of anti-Semitism. And I think generation after generation, we know and we learn that there's no such thing as aging out of anti-Semitism. It takes constant work, constant investment in time, in money, in partnerships. And I will tell everyone here that as far as the city council goes, we are continuing that investment. And as far as this team here, representatives here in the North Bronx and in the Bronx, advocacy organizations, we are working in concert to build those bridges between communities and to fight hate wherever it exists. Thank you.
Prejudice means judging before knowing, and prejudice is best overcome by the power of personal relations. And there's no organization that has done more to foster relationships, not only in the service of tolerance and acceptance, but in the service of mutual respect and mutual love between and among various communities, than the Jewish Community Relations Council, which has a special place in my heart. And so we're joined by the head, Gideon Taylor.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you to the Riverdale Y, does such remarkable work here in the community. To Congressman Torres, a leader, a hero, engaged not only on this issue, but on so many issues of concern to the Jewish community, to the wider community. We're privileged to have you as a colleague, a friend, and a leader. Councilman Dinowitz, also a friend, a partner, a leader. JCRC is honored to have and count among our allies individuals of stature, of tremendous, tremendous stature. The ADL, which does an incredible service for our community in analyzing data, in gathering data, and helping respond. It is indeed, as ADL says, a wake-up call. Children are not born hating. It's something that happens and develops along the way. And I think the message that we need to all take away from this survey, from the rise in anti-Semitism, is that this is a task that belongs to everyone. It belongs to organizations, certainly like JCRC and ADL and others. It belongs to our elected leaders. It belongs to community leaders. It belongs to teachers and principals and to parents. We recently we had Holocaust Memorial Day. And there's one message I've heard from Holocaust survivors when I talk to them about their experience. They said to me, it didn't start with Auschwitz. It didn't start with labor camps and labor battalions. It started with words and thoughts and things people said. And I think that's why it's important to look at attitudes and opinions and not say, that's just an opinion. Because we know what opinions lead to is to actions. And we've seen the actions here in our city, a doubling of anti-Semitic incidents in the last 2 years. Troubling, challenging for all of us. How do we as a community react to what we see in front of us, to this news, to this rise in hate against Jews and against others? For us at JCRC, there's two ways. One is certainly law enforcement reacting fast, quickly, with the resources needed to incidents, to prepare people for incidents that happen. But the second way is through education, through communication, through partnership, through connecting people. It's harder to hate people that you know. It's harder to have anti-Semitism when looking you in the face is someone who's Jewish or someone who talks about Judaism or a person of a different background. And I think that's the task that comes to all of us, is to make sure that we are a society and that we build a society, that all our partners and allies, whether in elected office or in community leadership, are drawn together through fellowships, through partnerships, through work together. And that is the way we fight anti-Semitism and we fight hate. Thank you.
And our final speaker is, I believe, our most important speaker, Rabbi Beanie Krause, because our mission is to create a safer place for the students that you educate. And so you're cultivating the future leaders, and we owe it to them to pass on a world that is much more loving than the one we find. And so we would want you to close this event.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Councilman. I don't want to be here. And I certainly don't want my students to be here. I didn't want to walk up the block from our school 2 blocks away and explain to them that we're taking time off instead of learning or instead of playing ball at recess to talk about hate. I didn't want to hear from one of them about his neighbor who has threatened him and his family, and that he has to go outside worrying a little bit more than he did last week or last year. But I do want to end this session with gratitude and with hope. Because I don't want to be here, but I am grateful for the fact that this exists. I'm grateful that you're all here. I'm grateful that we're all here. I'm grateful for the fact that when there's a problem, there's an organization that actually studies that problem and shares those findings with facts with the world. I'm grateful for the fact that there's a JCRC that took me and Congressman Torres and others to Israel together to support the Jewish state, to stand up for what is right, to build bridges with each other. I'm grateful for the fact that when something is wrong, the elected officials here that represent us, they don't wait, they don't hesitate, they speak up, and they speak the truth. And you should be grateful for that, because we don't want to be here. And we want the data to be better, and we want to be building bridges. But we need to know that when there's a problem, we can get on the phone, and they come, and they take our calls, and they respond. Right now, 2 blocks away from here at our school, as we were walking out, 50 students from Atmosphere Academy, from a local charter school, were walking in to join 100 of our students in a program called Names Not Numbers, where they're going to learn how to interview Holocaust survivors when it's still possible, to learn about humanity, to learn that we're all human beings with what we call Tselem Elohim, born in the image of God, and that when we sit with each other and we talk to each other and we understand each other, then we fight hate. And that's the best way to fight hate. I'm grateful for the fact that we can get together for Shabbat dinner, that we can get together to celebrate, that we care about each other, and that we can make the world a better place through the things that we do and the relationships that we have. This week is going to be the 1-year anniversary of the death of my father. My father came from Romania. He always said it was, thank God he wasn't sent to Auschwitz, it was just the regular anti-Semitism that he had to live through. He was afraid of dogs till the day he died because they used to throw dogs at him on the way home from school. And for fun, throw him off a roof. And he told that to our kids on Yom HaShoah, to your grave. But he came here, and for his entire life, his message to me was, this place is different. This country is different. This place is different. This government is different. And I still believe that to be true. I am saddened by the data that we learned, and I hope that we will be able to spread the message of love and relationships and building community together. But I believe that because of the people who we're standing with, this place will always be different and will be better. Thank you.
So in closing, we cannot separate anti-Semitic violence from the beliefs that inspire the violence. We must confront hate at its root cause. We must confront the anti-Semitic beliefs, the tropes, the conspiracy theories that feed into hate. So with that said, we'd be happy to take whatever questions you might have.
Hi, this is Olivia Press. With this funding, is it going to go to private insurers also? And was it predicted amount of time to change that statistic and data of anti-Semitism over the years?
What's the?
Time it will take to change the statistics.
Because there was a big change from 2019 till now.
Yeah, so
What's kind of, what do you predict? How long will that change? And
to your first question, private institutions can apply for the funding. So institutions, both public and private, that's accurate. And then I think in order to answer your second question, we have to ask ourselves, what are the forces driving anti-Semitism? As I said earlier, there's nothing unprecedented about anti-Semitism, and it's an ancient hatred that dates back thousands of years. What is unprecedented is social media, which is a factor in causing anti-Semitism to spread at a pace, on a scale, to an extent that we've never seen before. And so it's not the only cause, but it's a central cause in driving the growth of anti-Semitism in our society. And it's a hard problem to solve because as a member of Congress, we have to ask ourselves, how do you regulate social media? How do you rein in extremism on social media without running afoul of the First Amendment? And it's not a question that lends itself to a simple answer. I don't know if you, Scott, you have anything to add on it?
So in terms of how long this will take, I mean, there are a lot of factors. Social media is one factor. The polarization in our society is another factor. These are big issues that are societal issues. It's not just impacting anti-Semitism, but it's fueling a rise in all forms of hate, a general emboldening of extremists. These are not things where you can just predict. What you can do is put in place things that will help that. One of which is education. I mean, this is key. The idea that we have anti-bias programs in the schools, anti-hate, anti-bullying, Holocaust education programs, all of these kinds of things will help create a better world, a better future, where people learn how to respect one another, where they learn to celebrate difference and celebrate diversity and not just look down on it. So you can't put a timeline on this, but we all need to move forward towards a better future.
And there's one nuance in the report that I want to drive home, which Scott brought up. You know, when it comes to most forms of bigotry and extremism, there tends to be a generational gap. Younger Americans are significantly less racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic than older Americans. That there's a sense almost of the inevitability of progress in our attitudes. The exception to that rule appears to be anti-Semitism, is that younger Americans are only slightly less anti-Semitic than older Americans. And one of the factors is social media, and that's something that we have to confront. So, any more questions? Thank you for joining us. Thank you.